Hey guys, welcome to the Awakening Report. I'm taking your questions today. It's always great to be with you. Before I get into it, I want to let you know that we have a trip coming up next year, Israel, April 2021. If you have been thinking about going, I want to invite you to come with us. It's going to be a great trip. It's going to be from April 4th through hold on, like the 17th. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure. Um, Pretty sure that's what we're doing. So maybe the 16th. I got to double check. But anyway, it's going to be a fantastic trip. Pastor Gary and I are doing it. He's doing most of the organizing. He gets all the credit for that, I have to say. Doing an awesome job. But if you've never been, you should go with us. We have really worked hard to make sure that it's affordable. And if for some weird reason COVID should still be going on and nobody's letting people in or out or whatever, you get 100% money back guaranteed. So come with us. Check it out at thewaycongregation.com. Thewaycongregation.com. You can check out the information there. And I hope you're coming with us. I know there's several people who watch the show regularly that are going to be there. So you'll get to meet them. I'll get to meet you. You'll get to meet me. It'll be great. We'll get to hang out. Man, the food is awesome. The food can't argue with the food. Of course, the trip is awesome. You get to go and see Israel. We get a professional driver. You know, years ago, my mom came to visit me in Israel, and I sort of put the trip together ourselves. I rented a car, and I found out where to stay, which hotels. It was a lot of work. I mean, yes, we did save money, but at an expense. It still cost me. It cost me my time and my effort and a little bit of sanity. And I had to then, do those crazy things like look for a parking spot. Like, well, that's no big deal. Well, when you have limited time and you want to get right to the sites in Jerusalem, for example, and you've got to find parking, it's not impossible, but it does take time, right? And you might say, boy, I want to go from here over to that monument over there. And it doesn't look that far, but by the time you walk there, you discover it's actually quite a ways. And boy, a bus ride sure would have been nice. Those are the great things about going with us. So check it out on our website, thewaycongregation.com. Let's get into your questions. Man, I'm dying to get into these. Let's do it. Hello, Reverend Doug, says Ed Doss. That's funny. Don't call me Reverend. What is the significance of the ransom in Exodus 30, verses 11 and 12? Well, let's take a look. Exodus 30, verse 11. Let me share my screen with you guys so that you can be part of the action. All right, here we are. So, Exodus 30. What's up with the ransom? Okay, let's go back a little bit. Aaron shall make atonement upon its horns once a year with the blood of the sin offering of atonement. Once a year he shall make atonement upon it throughout your generations. It is most holy to the Lord. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when you take the census of the children of Israel for their number, then every man shall give a ransom for himself to the Lord when you number them, so that there may be no plague among them when you number them. This is what everyone among those who are numbered shall give: half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The half shekel shall be an offering to the Lord. All right, well, great question, Ed. God said that all souls are mine, and all the firstborn especially are mine, right? So when somebody would give a sacrifice, the firstborn had to give a ransom for their lives. God never expected people to commit any kind of human sacrifice. That was nowhere in his mind. But as a matter of principle, shall we call it bookkeeping, he said you got to keep a ransom. Now, what's interesting is when the children of Israel seriously blew it, and instead of every firstborn man, being the priest of the home, he then selected the Levites, and then they had to pay that ransom. So we can check that out in Numbers chapter 3, where they actually pay it. So they kind of pay this back. Pretty interesting. So here we have Numbers chapter 3. Bring the tribe of Levi near and present them before Aaron the priest, that they may serve him, and they shall attend to his needs, etc. I want to just skip down to the exciting part here. So he says, I myself have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel instead of every firstborn who opens the womb among the children of Israel. Therefore, the Levites shall be mine, because all the firstborn are mine. On the day that I struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified, to myself all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. They shall be mine. Then the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness, saying, number the children of Israel, or Levi, by their fathers' houses, by their families. You shall number every male from a month old and above. Okay, so he does that. And let's see here. Where does it say that they take the money instead? So they counted them. All right, number all the firstborn males of the children of Israel. So now they're doing a census. They're doing a comparison. And he says, you should take the Levites for me, I am the Lord, instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and the livestock of the Levites, instead of all the firstborn among the livestock of the children of Israel. So Moses numbered all the firstborn among the children of Israel, as the Lord commanded him, and all the firstborn males, according to the number of names from a month old and above, of those who were numbered, of them were 22,273. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and their livestock, etc., and for the redemption of the 273 of the firstborn of the children of Israel, who are more than the number of the Levites, you shall take 5 shekels for each one individually. You shall take them in the currency of the shekel of the sanctuary, the shekel of 20 gerahs, and you shall give the money with the excess number of them is redeemed, with which the excess number is redeemed, to Aaron and his sons. All right, so God says that they are his. There was a little bookkeeping difference. And so God said, okay, we got to work this out. We've got to pay the difference. And that's exactly what they did. Now, why? I mean, why should God say, well, they're mine? I don't know why he said it. I know that he said it. And there's something about that. I'm going to guess that it goes back to Passover, when God took the children of Israel out. He said, all the firstborn are mine. Why did he say that? Because remember what he did to Pharaoh and Egypt, and the firstborn who did not get underneath the blood, they lost their lives. So I'm thinking there's a bookkeeping thing going on here. Now that may sound really strange. Why would God be interested in bookkeeping? Because God is a God of justice. God is a God of laws, righteousness, right? He keeps good books. When God balances his checkbook, it always balances. I tell you, which is awesome. I'm not the bookkeeping type, but I'm glad that God is, because that means he doesn't just say, well, it doesn't matter. I'm gracious, so whatever. He is gracious, but there always has to be a reckoning. If he's going to show mercy, there has to be something here, right? There has to be some kind of a balance. The books have to be balanced. And again, you might say, well, I just don't understand it. God is God. He can do whatever he wants. That is a misnomer that is spoken by so many people. It does start to grind on me after a while, because no, God cannot just do whatever he wants. How do I know that, right? How can I be so bold in saying something like that? Doug, how could you possibly know that God just can't do whatever he wants? I know for a fact that this is the truth, because Jesus asked, he said, Father, if there's any other way to let this cup pass from me, not my will, but yours be done. And did God say, oh, I found a way, Yeshua, you don't have to go to the cross, forget it? No. Jesus asked because there was a real price involved in redeeming the lives of people. There was a tremendous cost, and Jesus paid the cost. So we know that God is into bookkeeping. That is why Jesus had to go to the cross. If he could have just done whatever he wanted and say, I'm God, I run this universe, I can do as I want, then Jesus went to the cross for no reason. But of course, we know that's not true. Jesus went for a very good reason. He went to purchase back, to buy back, redeem humanity, Israel, etc. So Jesus paid the price. Thank you, Ed, for that great question. Don't call me Reverend. Hey, Stephen in Liverpool. Great to have you here. Let's see here. Let's see. Okay, here's a question from Stephen. According to the Commonwealth of Israel understanding, are Gentiles no longer Gentiles once they are grafted in, or does the Commonwealth of Israel just refer to the two houses, meaning that Gentiles are still Gentiles, and so there is a difference between Israel and the church? And that's a good question. That's a good question. Let's take a look at Scripture. The best Scripture that I can think of for this question is, hold on, let's try again. Ephesians 2, verse 12. Let me back up, sorry. I should have said 11. Remember that you once Gentiles. All right, first of all, what does the word Gentile even mean? I think that's part of our little misunderstanding, is that what is a Gentile, right? So Gentile is coming from the Latin word gens, and it comes from the Greek word. If you go back into the Greek, you'll see that it's the word ethnou. All right, so ethnou is like ethnos, right? Like ethnicities, people groups. I guess that's a great way to say that. You might call them nations, tribes, tongues, nations, right? All of those different terms that are used to refer to what a Gentile is. Now, we might say by definition, if you're not Israelite, then you are of the nations. It's like saying, if you're not American, right, then you're not American, right? So if you're American, you're in. If you're not American, well, it doesn't make you bad. It's just you're one of the other nations. You're a foreigner to us Americans. That's all I'm saying. So here, God, through Paul, is telling us something important. Remember that you, once of the nations in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision, by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by hands. All right, so who is the circumcision? Well, of course, those are the Jews. In Paul's day, the Jewish people were the ones who called themselves the circumcision, and they called everybody else the uncircumcision. So here you have people who are of the nations. They are called uncircumcised because typically they were. And now he's saying that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For himself is our peace. He has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of separation. All right, what is Paul talking about here? So he's saying, look, okay, let's imagine that I'm a Jew. I'm Paul. Okay, so I'm Paul. I'm Jewish. And I'm talking to you guys who are Gentiles, who are not Jews. And the message is, look, you were once part of the non-Jewish, and the term Jew gets us in trouble, though, doesn't it? Because we start thinking that if you're not Gentile, now you're Jewish. I'm not saying that at all. Neither is Paul. Notice what Paul is saying. Paul is saying, he's not saying that now you're Jewish. He's saying now you are of the commonwealth of Israel. That is the point. You are now part of the commonwealth of Israel. You're no longer strangers from the covenants of promise. What are the covenants of promise? Well, those are the ones God made to the entire 12 tribes of Israel, that now these people who were of the nations are now part of this. All right, so where is Paul getting this idea? Well, we get to go back to Daniel chapter 9. So in Daniel chapter 9, verse 7, try again, verse 7, he says, "O Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but to us shame of face." Remember, Daniel is Jewish, right? He says, "To us a shame of face, as it is this day to the men of Judah," that's Daniel, "to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. There are still people in Jerusalem in Daniel's day, and all Israel." Now, who is all Israel? Well, notice he says those near and those far off in all the countries to which You have driven them to the countries. Now, let's just take a little peek underneath the hood here, and let's see what the language is. In fact, I am going to bring up this here. So now we have three altogether. So he says, Yerushalayim lechol Yisrael hakovim veharochakim bechol ha'aratzot, to all the lands, all the countries. And if we take a look in the Septuagint, I'm going back one verse, because the versification between the Septuagint and the English and the Hebrew is off by one verse. The real bummer. All right, so he says Panti Israel. Okay, so tus inukusin in Jerusalem ke Panti Israel tus engus ke tus makran, those who are near and those who are far, in all the gay, in all the earth. All right, so he's saying all the earth, where you've scattered them, right, where you've dispersed them is the literal word there. So Daniel is talking about both the house of Israel and the house of Judah. We know what happened to the house of Judah. They were taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar for 70 years, and then they went back. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them went back. And they carried on. And then they were there when Jesus came, etc. You guys know the story. What happened to the house of Israel? This is a big question. I'll tell you, this is the $1 million question, because this is where some of this discussion can get a little bit heated now and then. So let me take you guys back to 2 Kings, chapter 17. Let me get rid of those other translations because we don't need them. So he says, for so it was that the children of Israel sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they walked in the statutes of the nations. Notice here, the nations. Let's bring this back here just to get a sense of what this word nations is all about. All right, and let's see here. I just got to synchronize these. Let me think 1 second. Okay, so I walked in all the statutes of other nations. Yeah, ethnon. Sorry, I couldn't see it. There it is. Ethnon. Okay, so the word ethnon is talking about the ethnicities. So the children of Israel, we're going to look here at specifically the house of Israel in particular, they were walking in the ways of the ethnos, right? The ethnu, the ethnicities, the nations, the Gentiles. So God was basically saying, okay, you want to be like the Gentiles, you don't want to walk with me and serve me and love me, etc. Fine. You want to go be with those other gods? Fine. You can have them and they can have you. We're no longer a thing, right? I'm no longer your God. You're no longer my people. It's over. This marriage is over. Let's keep looking at this. So he says they went all these other places. Children of Israel did secretly against the Lord their God, things that were not right, etc. And I mean, it's a terrible, ugly list of the things that they were doing. So Judah wasn't really any better. So the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all of his prophets every year, saying, turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, which I sent to you by my servants, the prophets. But they didn't. They stiffened their necks, etc. And so they went after the nations, the ethnic, right? They after the goyim in Hebrew. They went after those again. And they did all these nasty, nasty, nasty things, which did not make God happy. And he says, and the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel, afflicted them, and delivered them into the hand of plunderers until he cast them from his sight. For he tore Israel from the house of David. Notice that. He tore Israel. Israel here, he's talking about the house of Israel, the northern kingdom. And they made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, king. So Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord. Again, that's the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel. For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. They did not depart from them until the Lord removed Israel. When we say Israel, he's not talking about Judah. He's talking specifically about the house of Israel. This distinction is so important. And I tell you, it's amazing. I understood the distinction historically. Of course, I knew that Israel and Judah broke up, but I did not understand the theological importance of it for years. I mean, I remember studying this stuff and I'm like, okay, so they split, that's too bad, right? But theologically, I did not understand what was the significance of this breakup. And now I'm like, I get it. It's so amazing. It's really incredible. So he says, so Israel, again, the house of Israel was carried away from their own land to Assyria, as it is to this day. Then the king of Israel brought people from Babylon, Kuta, Ava, Hamat, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. Right, and of course, where did they go? Into those very cities. So they always did the little swaparoo thing. And so then he took them away, etc. And we have more history there that's going on. All right, so I have not forgotten your question. I want you to know that. So the question, just to be really clear, according to the Commonwealth of Israel understanding, are Gentiles no longer Gentiles once they are grafted in, or does the Commonwealth of Israel just refer to the two houses, meaning that Gentiles are still Gentiles, and so is the difference between Israel and the church? I don't think there's any theological difference. Let's put it that way. Now, the people that live in the modern state of Israel, they're called Israelis. They're not going to just let you come waltzing in. You say, hey, I'm an Israelite. They're like, okay, sorry, buddy. We have rules, and you have to play by their rules if you want to immigrate to the modern state of Israel. So I'm not encouraging anybody to go banging on their door and saying, let me in. I can't believe you're keeping me out. But from a theological point of view, when we understand God's big picture and what Paul was telling us in the book of Ephesians, is that we are all in the same community. Now let's think about this community for a second. This community still has its own flavoring, its own style, its own character, right? It's like New York City. Everyone's a New Yorker, but nobody's the same, right? You've got Chinatown, you've got Brooklyn, you've got uptown, downtown, you got the Bronx, I'm not a New Yorker, right? But I've been there and I've seen enough movies to understand the flavor that they're all one, but they all bring their own flavoring. So even back then, there was a difference between the house of Israel and the house of Judah from a cultural point of view. Obviously, they were very, very similar, but they were different, right? Just like New York. They're all New York. They all belong to the same general group, but they have their little pockets. And that was true back then. So we are all one in Yeshua. We're all part of the Commonwealth of Israel. So there's no separation between us, but there is still a distinction when it comes to language, when it comes to culture, when it comes to the way we see things, the music that we select. And of course, this is one of the big reasons, probably the big reason that I stopped going exclusively on Sundays to church. I'm not throwing Sunday people under the bus, but I really came to the conviction that Shabbat is the day, and that God never changed the Sabbath to Sunday. It is still and always will be the seventh day. And once I realized that I was part of Israel, not Jewish, I'm not trying to be Jewish, but I'm part of Israel, then I realized that the Sabbath is for me. Then I realized and was convicted that eating clean is for me. That's when I realized that the feasts are not Jewish feasts. They're God's feasts. Have the Jews kept them? Yes. Do the Jews have their own particular style and character when they keep the feast? Yes. Can I learn from those things? Yes. Do I even borrow sometimes? Yes, I most certainly do. And I'm grateful that the Jews have been keeping the feast when nobody else on the planet was doing it. They were doing it. So I have a lot to learn from the Jewish community, but I'm not trying to be Jewish. I'm not trying to keep the feast. I don't keep the feast in order to be Jewish. I keep the feast because they're God's feast. And he said that they're for his people. And that's why I do it. But when I say, how do I do this? Yes, of course I go and I consult my Jewish brethren and say, how do you guys do it? Do you have any ideas for me? They say, well, we do this, we do that, we do this, we do that. I'm like, okay, that one's good, that one's good. Do I have to do that one? Well, it's not actually in the Bible, but it's a tradition. Okay, I'll take it or I'll leave it, right? Depending on how I understand that and how I feel about that and how it works into my own particular style, right? Because there are some things that are absolute mandates, and some things are like, well, if you want to eat dairy on Shavuot, go for it. But there's not like a commandment you have to eat dairy, but it's a nice tradition, right? So those are some of the considerations. So I would say that there's no distinction, theologically speaking, between the Commonwealth of Israel and the church. The church, the word kehillah in Hebrew, which is ecclesia in the Greek, that word, either way, in Hebrew or in Greek, was used throughout the Hebrew Bible to refer to the congregation of Israel, not the church, quote unquote, right? It was referring to Israel. And we discovered that not everybody who claimed to be part of the congregation was actually in the congregation. For example, we have, hold on, my mind is blanking. Korah, yes, Korah and his rebellion. Now, Korah he was part of Israel, right? He left Egypt. He was in, and yet he disqualified himself, and then he was out. So just because you're hanging out in a religious community or in the church or whatever you want to call it, you have to have a real faith in order for that to be a true relationship with God. Man, great question. Thank you, Stephen. That was really good. Carolinda has a question. She says, I know that we are adopted into the Commonwealth of Israel by virtue of adoption through Yeshua. So whether we actually belong physically to one of the lost tribes of Israel or not, what is vital now is our adoption. Correct. You are correct. You are correct. Now, I find those theories about, this tribe is hanging out behind that mountain and this one is hanging out of that country and this one's on that island. I think those are very interesting theories. I don't mind reading them or watching a little video about it, but I don't think that's the point. I really don't. As I see it, and this is a great follow-up question to Stephen's question, is what happened to the house of Israel? Well, they were scattered. So I'm glad you asked this. I'm going to go back to our text. Let's go to Hosea, chapter 1. All right, so Hosea, he says, go take a wife. We know he takes his wife Gomer. She continues to have children of harlotry, right? For the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord, right? So he does this and he has a couple kids, right? So he says he's going to bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. That's the northern kingdom. Let's make that really, really clear. And so then she conceives, has a daughter. Call her Lo Ruhama. What a lousy name. No Mercy. Hey, No Mercy, come here. That's a terrible name, right? What does God say? I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel. I will utterly take them away. Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah. So notice that distinction right there. No mercy, Lo Ruhama for the house of Israel. Yes, mercy for the house of Judah. Right? And then he says, when he has a son, call him Lo Ami, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God. Right? This is the separation. This is the divorce that is happening. Of course, then we have this incredible promise, but I'm going to, bless you guys like crazy. And then he says it again in chapter 2, bring charges against your mother. Bring charges. She's not my wife, nor am I her husband. Notice these charges here. This is the handwriting That's against us. This handwriting was nailed to the cross. That's what was nailed to the cross. The charges of adultery were nailed to the cross. Hallelujah. I'm so excited about that. So he says, your mother has played the harlot. She conceived them, behaved shamefully, etc. And again, another, read this chapter. It's amazing, but I don't have time right now. So take a look at it. He says, I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I'll betroth you to me in righteousness and justice and loving kindness and mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. That is coming to pass in that day. All right, so great stuff is coming. And then I will sow her for myself. So this is a pun on the word Jezreel, that he's going to now sow her, right? Jezreel is, of course, in the northern kingdom. But he's going to sow her for myself in the earth, and I will have mercy on her who had not obtained mercy. Then I will say to those who are not my people, you are my people, and they shall say, you are my God. Let's take a look at a couple other passages just to get a better sense of what God is saying to Israel. So he says, Ephraim has mixed himself among the peoples. Well, let's take a look at the language here so we get a sense of what's going on. So Ephraim has Yitbolal. All right, that's kind of an interesting word. So to confuse, he's confused himself. Same word as the Tower of Babel, where they confuse the languages. Right. So he's now with the people. Right. So Laos. This is another word for peoples, people groups. He has mixed himself among them. All right. So he's done that. Let's check out verse 8. Chapter 8, verse 8. Chapter 8. Verse 8, Israel is swallowed up. Now they are among the Gentiles like a vessel in which is no pleasure. So, Nivla Israel ata hayu bagoim, right? So they're among the Gentiles. That's where they are. Okay. We go back a verse because of the versification difference. And now, again, into entus ethnesin. Okay. Where are they? They're among the Gentiles. They're among the Gentiles, they're the peoples, right? So where did Israel go? Among the Gentiles. One more verse for you guys. Chapter 9, verse 17. He says, my God will cast them away because they did not obey him, and they shall be wanderers among the Gentiles. All right. So again, in Hebrew, it's bagoim. In the Greek, ethnesim. Right. So where did Israel go? Into the Gentiles. So this is a simple math problem. If Israel went into the Gentiles and God is calling them back, how does he bring them back? Well, there's two options, right? If the northern kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes, had remained distinct as a people group, then sure, he could bring them back because they're still, again, behind a certain mountain. They're hanging out in the Caucasus Mountains, and all this, 2,700 years, they've just been hiding away, waiting for God to bring them back. That's one possibility. It seems incredibly improbable that would happen. The other possibility that I think is very, very, very probable is that when they were taken away against their will, mind you, most of them, maybe some escaped, but most of them went away. And what happened to them? They got forcefully torn apart from their family groups, from their people, and so they were swallowed up. Swallowed up. Think about when you swallow a piece of food, what happens to it? It goes into your stomach. Of course, you chew it. Then it gets, so it's in smaller pieces, goes into your stomach, and your little stomach fluids and acids, they break it up until that apple that you just ate, for example, now becomes part of you. So if Israel was swallowed up by the Gentiles, then that means they were assimilated into the Gentiles. So if God's going to call the Gentiles, who is he calling? He's calling the 10 tribes of Israel. Can we prove genetically? I seriously doubt it. And I think it's not even worth trying to discuss such a thing. I would just say that the seed was spread out there, and whatever happened genetically after that. Could be an interesting study, but it's probably not worth your time. It's just they became part of the nations. And so now God is calling the nations into relationship. So he's blessing. Look at this. What was a curse, he's now turned into a blessing. Now I'm going to bring in all the nations because of Israel. A couple more passages. I mean, there's so much. And I'm glad you asked the question, because it's a really, really important question. And let me just say that it took me a very long time to connect the dots. I mention that because I want you to feel good about yourself, that it's not like I just got it all of a sudden. It took time for connect this dot and that dot. So now I get it, but it really took a while. And of course, I had a lot of unlearning to do. I had to put away the things that I thought I knew. So notice what Paul says here in Romans chapter 9. Even us whom he called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. As he also says in Hosea, I will call them my people who are not my people. So who's he talking about? The Gentiles. And her beloved who was not beloved. Now here's where it gets interesting, because he did say specifically to the house of Israel that you're not my people, but then he also said, so it will be of the house of Israel and the house of Judah, that they'll be like the sands of the sea. Right? So he says that at the end of chapter 1 and chapter 2 in Hosea. So he's going to bring them both together. And Hosea doesn't really tell us what exactly happened, but he's going to call them my people who were not my people, and her beloved who was not beloved. Who is Paul applying this to from Hosea? Right here, the Gentiles, right? So how were the Gentiles, the nations, not his people? I mean, they were always not his people, right? Well, no. There was a group called the 10 tribes, the northern kingdom, that was his people. And then they had a divorce, and God said, you're not my people. And he sent them out into the nations, right? He sent them into the nations. Now, let me pull up for you 1 Peter 2:10. All right. So he says, now you are a chosen, not generation, that's a bad translation. You're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. When did God say this? Back at Mount Sinai, right? He said this back at Mount Sinai, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but now are the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. When did God say this? We saw that in Hosea chapter 1. Lo Ruchama. Call her Lo Ruchama, for I will not have mercy on you. Call him Lo Ami, for you are not my people. So now Peter is applying this to the Gentiles. And he's saying, you're it. But it's not to the exclusion of the Jewish people. It's the regrafting together. It's now the two sticks. Ezekiel chapter 37, read that. Write it down if you need to. Ezekiel 37, there's two sticks, Israel, Judah, and he's going to put them back together. All right. If you got these kind of two sticks in your hand, he's putting them back, end to end, putting them back together so that there'll be one stick in his hand, never to be two nations again. Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you. Let me go over to Blake here. In research, I found compelling evidence that C.I. Scofield was a con man and used by political Zionists to influence the Western churches to support an Israeli state. Should this reference Bible be tossed? Should it be tossed? Well, I find a lot of references good for that very purpose, for referencing things. So you may want to hold on to it, maybe put it on the bottom shelf, all right? And you can pull it out every once in a while and say, what did Scofield say about that, right? So, I typically don't throw books, but you can do as you wish. But that he was a con man, from what I have read and heard, yes, I believe that is true. Did he get some things right? He may have. Okay, I don't think that his con man days necessarily made everything wrong that he said, but he's certainly a questionable source. There's no doubt about that. I'm going to stop on that. All right. Mary, thank you for that question. All right. Let's see here. While chatting with Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, they always refer to firstborn. What is the understanding of that text? Okay. Well, I'm not quite sure which text you're referring to. Obviously, you're talking about Jesus. There is a passage that talks about, let's see, firstborn. I think it's in Colossians. I think that's the one. So if you could in the future give me the verse reference, it saves me a lot of time, so I don't have to kind of dig that up. But understand that firstborn is not just, it's not merely who was born first, but who gets who has the right of inheritance, right? Who becomes the number one? Let's think about this for a second. Jacob had 12 sons. His firstborn was Reuben. So Reuben should have gotten all the rights of the firstborn, but did he? No. Why not? Because he says he went into his father's couch, right? So he slept with one of the, I think it was Bilhah that he slept with. Not a good thing, right? Not a good idea. He was trying to take the kingdom for himself. And Jacob's like, no, you can't do that. That is a violation. You cannot do that. So he was disqualified. Then you have Simeon and Levi. They went and hamstrung everybody. Well, they killed everybody. It says that they hamstrung everybody in Genesis chapter 48, I believe, 47, 48, one of those, where Jacob is giving the blessings over the 12 sons. So they were disqualified. So who's left? Judah. Judah is the one who becomes the firstborn. Now, was he technically firstborn? No, of course not. I mean, Reuben was the first one to come out. There's no doubt about that. Everybody agrees. But Judah got the right of inheritance, and so he became the leader. What about Joseph? He was pretty awesome. Joseph was awesome. There's no doubt about that. But he was just born too late, so he did not become the so-called firstborn. So I understand where the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses are trying to go with this, and they're trying to say, look, he was the first one. Well, it's not so much a matter of who came out of the womb first, but who has the rights and privileges and prerogatives of the office of firstborn. That's really what I think we should focus on versus trying to say that Jesus is first born. And Jesus was born. Let's be clear about that, right? He was the first. He was born of the Virgin Mary. There's no doubt about that. But when Paul talks about being the firstborn, he's not talking about the fact that he's literally born. He's talking about that he has the rights, just like Judah, who was not the first one to come out of the womb, but he was the one who got that office of firstborn. And so therefore, he is the lawgiver. He's the one who became obviously king over Israel, etc. Very cool. All right, let's go here to our next question. All right, guys, if you have questions, it really helps me if you put a little Q in front of them. Then I know who is chatting and who is asking. All right, so I'm totally happy if you guys chat. That is great. It just a little bit tricky when I'm trying to figure out where my next question is. So let's see. I'm almost there. Hold on just a second. I think I saw a Q. Here we go. This is from Laughing Like the Flowers. Is the term antichrist in the Bible? I can only find antichrist in a decent translation. The meaning is not even similar. Well, so yeah, the term antichrist is a great question. Antichrist is really kind of a misnomer. We do find it in the books of the letters of John, 1 John, 2 John, talking about this spirit of antichrist. So anti is against or in place of Christ, right? So When we say the Antichrist, it's really probably not the best term, but we use it because it's popular. And I use it. I will be completely upfront with you guys. I use the term Antichrist because it's part of our vocabulary. And instead of me saying to everybody I meet, hey, you're using that term wrong, I'm like, you know what? If you can't beat them, join them. All right. But I always want to qualify when I say Antichrist, who am I talking about? Right? That's a very generic term for the bad guy at the end of time. Really, what the Bible talks about, per your question, we have in Revelation, we have the beast. The beast is who we would call the Antichrist. In Daniel, he's called the little horn. He's called the boastful one, right? So that's also the so-called Antichrist. We have in the writings of Paul, the son of perdition, the man of sin. That is also the Antichrist. And I would hasten to say that in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Gog, in my humble opinion, that is also talking about the Antichrist. I know some people would disagree with me. That's okay. That's their opinion. I'm going to be talking about Gog in my next book that I have. So I'm working on right now. I'm going to write another one. So I'm writing furiously as fast as I can. But I will be talking about Gog and how that is, in fact, also the Antichrist. So those are the different terms that I can remember off the top of my head. There may be some others, but I'm pretty sure I got them all. Let's see. Of course, Jesus talks about the abomination of desolation. He does not talk about the person that does that, just that it's going to happen. So the one that commits the abomination of desolation is a type, not the same, but is a type of Antiochus Epiphanes, who did that very thing back in the 2nd century BC. And he went into the temple and he desecrated it. He took a pig and he sacrificed it and offered it on the altar. So he did something that was an abominable, right? He took an abomination, in this case a pig, and he sacrificed it in a holy place. That was an abomination. And that abomination, that act, then caused the place to become desolate. So that's the abomination that causes desolation, or the abomination of desolation. We kind of say it in shorthand. So I think part of the challenge is sometimes we use Christianese to talk about the Antichrist when, there really isn't that term, other than just somebody who was opposed to Christ, and that could be lots of people, not necessarily this end times figure who's obviously going to rise up. Trying to think if there is anything else in the text referring to Antichrist. Yeah, I think so. So anyway, the abomination of desolation that Jesus talked about is what Paul calls the son of perdition or the man of sin. So both of those. Oh, there's one more actually. In Revelation 17, it talks about the beast who was, is not, and who will ascend out of the abyss. So that's the same beast. That's the same Antichrist dude that we're talking about. So that's all of them I can think of. If you guys find any more, put it in the comment section below, and I'll check those out. Thanks, guys. All right. Here's from Fabian. Hey, Fabian, ¿qué tal? Hey, Douglas. Are the elect lady and the elect sister in 2 John 1 verses 1 and 13 the two houses? Now that is a great question. Well, let's check it out. I mean, that is a good one. So 2 John, thankfully, 2 John is pretty short. All right, so to the elect lady and her children. Right. So yeah, who is John talking about? So verse 1 and 13, the children of your elect sister greet you. Amen. Well, Fabian, I think you have something. Now, I have not studied this to the nth degree, but I think you're onto something. That John is probably not talking to one individual lady, but he's talking to this woman as a collective. Let me think here. In 1 Peter, First Peter, if I can spell Peter. Hold on. Try again. First Peter, chapter 5, verse 7. We have some similar language. All right. So he says, she who is in Babylon, elect together with you, greets you, and so does Mark, my son. All right. So who is this person in Babylon that Peter is referring to? The English kind of throws us off here, which is unfortunate because in the Greek, it just says E. This is the Greek E or A, depending on how you want to pronounce that. That is a feminine singular definite article. So feminine singular nominative definite article. And it doesn't say she. When we say she, we start thinking, oh, she must be referring to a person, a woman, right? But it's something feminine greets you. So what is this something feminine? Now, it doesn't have to be feminine in the physical sense, but feminine in the grammatical sense, right? What do I mean by that? Feminine in the grammatical sense means that we're looking for a word in the text that is feminine that he is referring back to. So if we go back to First Peter chapter 1, so we have to the pilgrims elect according to the foreknowledge, inheritance. I haven't looked at this for a little while, so it's a little bit rusty as to where the verse I'm looking for actually is, but he's referring to something that is elect. Of course, we just saw it. Hold on. I know I'm really close. Chosen generation, begging sojourners. Yeah. I have this in one of my presentations, but I'm trying to remember. There's a key word, and if I remember correctly, it should be the elect. All right. So I'm going to cheat here and look up the word elect in First Peter. Let's just do the current book. And that'll save us a little bit of time. Okay. All right. So it's the something that's elect. Yeah, I'd have to go back and review my notes because I can't quite put my finger on it. I wish I could, but it's the something that is elect, and that something that is elect is referring to all of Israel, right? So it's not the church that was in Babylon or the church that was in Rome. I hear that often. Well, Peter was talking to the church in Rome. That's nonsense. First of all, Babylon is never, ever a code word for Rome. It's just not there. That was invented by the church fathers because they couldn't possibly imagine that God could be doing something with Israel, right? That didn't fit their paradigm. He's talking about those who were living in the nation and the area of Babylon, who were in fact Jews at that time, and they were elect. They were elect because God had chosen them, and so he's saying that the people that are there who are elect greet you. That's all he's saying. So anyway, I think I don't know if it's per your question, Fabian. I don't know if it's necessarily the two houses. But I think you could definitely make an argument for that. I think you're on the right track. Fantastic. All right, here's a question from Ernie. What's your interpretation of Revelation 2:9 and 3:9? All right, let's take a look at Revelation 2:9. All right, I know your work, tribulation, and poverty, but you're rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Okay, so this question, one I think that has been unfortunately very misunderstood, this passage here. Is it saying that there's some Jewish cabal somewhere? I don't think so. Could it be that there were some people who were not Jewish but said, "Oh, I'm a Jewish"? Sure, absolutely. Now, was it the Khazar Jews? I don't think so. That is one of those theories that gets out there. So there's clearly some people that are claiming to be something, but they're not. They're claiming to be Jewish, but they're not. Age-old question: who's a Jew? Right? This is a burning question that people have. But Paul makes it pretty clear. I think Jesus said, in a sense, I'm going to paraphrase, but you know, if to be born of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is definitely a pathway into the kingdom, but it's not merely. You have to then continue in that faith, right? So ultimately, to be a Jew in the biblical sense would be somebody who is following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Part of the trouble, though, is that we have just people who are born this way or born that way. So I don't want to give the impression that, if you're not religious, that you're not Jewish. I'd say you're still Jewish, in my opinion. So there are people that were claiming to be something and they were not. So I would not go too far beyond the text. I know people have done that, and they have made all kinds of claims about the Khazar Jews, that they're just fake Jews, but they're claiming to be Jews. Being Jewish is not easy. There's been a tremendous amount of persecution for somebody who's Jewish. So a lot of Jews have tried not to be Jewish. They've claimed that they're not Jewish, and yet the Nazis found them out anyway. So from what I can tell from history, claiming to be Jewish but not being Jewish has very little benefit as time went on. Maybe in the first century there was something, and of course we have to be clear that even though there were people in the church who oppressed the Jewish people, in the early stages, there were also some people who were Jewish who weren't too nice to the Christians, to the followers of Yeshua, Jewish or not. Saul Paul comes to mind. He was certainly Jewish, and he was not very nice for quite a while. And then the Lord got his heart and turned him around. So these are just things to keep in mind. I hope that gives a little bit of clarity on that. I just don't think I can give any more elucidation on that verse, but thank you. So, all right, let's see here. Looking at some more questions. Oh man, we are out of time. I can't believe it. Oh, that is too bad. Well, Ernie has a follow-up question. Were the European Jews converts to the Jewish religion? And another follow-up: were the black tribe of Judah scattered around the four corners of the world? All right. Trying to think how to answer these questions. Well, there may have been some European Jews who were converts to the Jewish religion, but most of them were born into it. Most of them grew up keeping these traditions. Like I said, there's very little incentive to become a Jew after, say, the first or second century AD. By the third century AD, the Jews are very much falling out of favor. By the time of Constantine, for sure, when Christianity becomes the official state religion, to be Jewish was now something that would be spurned. So why would you want to promote that? Now, as the centuries went on, there were various debates that went on, and they did try to stand up and say, here's what the scriptures are saying from our perspective, but they were vastly outnumbered, and you could be burned at the stake for different things. So I can't think of any benefit to somebody claiming to be Jewish, say from maybe the third, fourth century AD till today. I just can't think of any. I mean, look through history. You've got the Spanish Inquisitions. They were out to get the Jews, and of course the heretics, but most of those were Jews. Obviously, there were some people that really did believe in Christ, and they were persecuted too. But the Jews, more than not, were tremendously persecuted, and as a result, many of them left. And in fact, a lot of people in Latin American countries, people that whose last name ends with EZ, like um, I'm trying to think of Cortés, for example, something like that. Those, according to various theories that I think hold quite a bit of water, are suggesting that those are actually of Jewish descent. They got out of Spain because it was dangerous. It was dangerous for their lives. You think of the Russian pogroms, not just Russia, but anywhere in sort of the Slovak countries. Of course, the daddy of them all, the Holocaust and the horrors and atrocities that took place in the Holocaust. So there's no reason to say I'm going to become Jewish because I just think it's easier, right? No. Now, per your second question, were the black tribe of Judah scattered around the four corners of the world? Well, I'm not aware of a black tribe of Judah. Judah is a tribe, of course, and we know that when King Solomon was visited by the Queen of Sheba, that according to the book of the Song of Solomon, it seems that they had quite a passionate love affair. And according to the traditions, going back thousands of years by the Ethiopians, they had a love affair. Okay, and out came some Jewish Ethiopians. Now Israel has considered them to be Jewish, so much so that starting in the late 70s, they started airlifting some of them out to get them out because they're Jewish. All right, so now if you're talking about the Ethiopians, I'm not aware of any Ethiopians that were scattered to the four corners of the world. I have a hunch that maybe behind this question there's kind of the Black Israelite movement, which I see no problem with Israelites or Jews being black or being of African descent or dark pigmentation, whatever we want to call that. I see no problem at all. The thing that I find very distasteful about the Black Israelite movement is they want to say that they and only they are the real Jews. Well, that's a problem. If your first question has any relation to that regarding Revelation 2:9 and 3:9, I think the same thing could be leveled at the Black Israelite movement as well. So, um, I don't think it's about color; it's about this heritage. And as people, for example, the Queen of Sheba had a child by Solomon, then you're going to have this group of people that has much darker pigmentation. Great, I think that's awesome. But then when not necessarily the Ethiopians, but the Black Israelite movement starts saying that no, we're the only true Jews, there's a real problem with that. There's an incredible problem with that, and it's just plain racism. And I hope that's not where you're coming from, Ernie. But in case you know people that are of that persuasion, maybe you can share that with them. So thank you guys, man. I'm out of time. I can't believe it. It's such a bummer. But guys, save your questions till next time, and we are going to get back to those the next time we have the show. So thank you for tuning in. Tuning, does that make me old? I'm not sure. Anyway, if you haven't checked out our website, go to the Way Congregation. Come with us on our trip next year, April 2021. We're going to Israel. I'd love to see you guys join us. I'd love to get to meet you and say, "Oh, you're from the UK. Or you're from Pennsylvania, or from wherever." And it'd be great to hang out with you guys. Really a wonderful trip. So God bless you guys. Take care.